Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to the fifth meeting of the Public Utility Commission for calendar year 2014, and ask that you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first matter on this morning's agenda is the approval of the minutes of the February 6th public meeting. And if you didn't watch Jimmy Kimmel last night, you'll get an opportunity to hear from Commissioner Whitmer. She is the editor of the minutes. Commissioner Whitmer.
As we know, the Oscars were recently held, and unlike John Travolta, who famously messed up an award winner's name, I have been practicing very hard. And so, Mr. Chairman Paulino Roberto, I am here to offer the reviewed minutes of the February 6, 2014 public meeting and move that they be approved as submitted.
Second. Any discussion? Any objections? It's better than...
Apparently there's a little bit of a lag in the back.
It's better than being referred to as President Putin, so I appreciate that. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as submitted, and it's a pleasure to welcome to the podium to begin our public meeting Ms. Cheryl Walker Davis. And Cheryl, before we begin, I just want to take this opportunity amongst my colleagues and I to personally thank you for the tremendous efforts you put forth in a very successful Black History Month celebration. It really shines on the fact that this commission is recognized in state government for our efforts, and I know you and your team have done a remarkable job over the years organizing that event, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. May it please this honorable commission, on behalf of your various offices and bureaus, we present for your consideration and disposition the following agenda items. Commencing on page 1, with matters on behalf of the Bureau of Audits, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation to release the audit report pertaining to PPL Electric Utilities Corporation's Universal Service Rider for the years 2011 and 2012.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Turning to page 2, and matters on behalf of the Bureau of Consumer Services, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation to with regard to the proposed final order involving Duquesne Light Company's Universal Service and Energy Conservation Plan for 2014 through 2016.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On behalf of the Office of Special Assistance, commencing on page 3, it should be noted that the first item pertaining to the petition involving PennDOT and Columbia Water has been postponed until public meeting of March the 20th. It is recommended that the Commission adopt the staff recommendation pertaining to the proceeding involving the Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement versus Glacial Energy of Pennsylvania, Inc.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? Any Yes, Commissioner Call.
Chairman, because I think Judge Salapa got it right, I will vote no. I would have adopted his recommendation.
So noted. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the motion passes 4-1, noting the dissent of Commissioner Cawley.
Continuing with matters on behalf of the Office of Special Assistance on page 4 of the public meeting agenda, with regard to the proceeding involving the informal investigation by the Bureau of Investigation Enforcement versus Rescom Energy, LLC, Mr. Chairman, there is your joint motion along with Commissioner Whitmer.
Yes, I'd like to have the joint motion here this morning with Commissioner Whitmer entered into the record as if read in its entirety. Before the Commission for disposition is an opinion in order releasing a settlement agreement between the Commission's Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement and Rescom Energy, LLC for comment. The settlement agreement addresses allegations of slamming, fraudulent, deceptive, and otherwise unlawful marketing practices and a do not call violation. In addition to providing that Rescom will pay a $59,000 civil penalty, the settlement notes that Rescom took certain corrective steps or actions designed to avoid similar violations in the future. Commissioner Whitmer and I this morning do not feel, however, that the Commission has enough information to evaluate whether the civil penalty and corrective action are sufficient to address the alleged violations. Specifically, complaints against Rescom allege violations of the Commission's anti-slamming regulations. The remedial actions outlined in the settlement agreement, however, all relate to marketing practices. Therefore, we seek further information on how Rescom has revised its operational procedures so as to safeguard against future slamming incidents. Further, neither the settlement agreement before us this morning supports or contains sufficiently clear information as to the total universe of potential customers that were affected by Rescom's actions and questions. As such, we seek further information related to the number of customers that were affected by Rescom's allegations of illegal marketing practices, and how many customers were allegedly slammed, and how many of those customers Rescom attempted to allegedly slam but successfully rescinded, and how many do not call violations allegedly occurred. I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for from I&E in this joint motion is a little bit more metrics around your investigative efforts before we sign off on this settlement. The parties should therefore file a supplemental statement in support of providing this information, as well as any other information they deem to be relevant, and therefore we move this morning that the Office of Special Assistance prepares an opinion in order consistent with this motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
In omnibus fashion, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the items commencing with the recommendation appearing at the bottom of page 4 in the proceeding, the complaint proceeding involving Sporty Smith and Betty Ricks versus Pico, and continuing to include all items on pages 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 through and including the interconnection agreement proceeding involving Verizon Pennsylvania and Mosaic Networks.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services, it is recommended, again in omnibus fashion, that the Commission adopt all items commencing with the application proceeding of Charles E. Groth and Sons, Inc. on page 10, and continuing with all items on pages 10, 11, 12, 13, through the first 3 items on page 14, that being the application of Teleport Communications America, LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt the staff recommendation in the proceeding involving Commonwealth Telephone, DBA Frontier Communications 2014 Price Stability Index Service Price Index Report, noting the statement of Commissioner Brown.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Brown for purposes of her statement. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am recusing myself from voting on this matter because of my brother's employment with Frontier.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes 4-0, noting the recusal statement from Commissioner Brown.
And it is recommended that the Commission adopt the remaining 2 items on behalf of the Bureau of Technical Utility Services through and including the investigation pertaining to the railroad bridge involving Yellow Dog Road at the bottom of page 15.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
On behalf of the Law Bureau, on page 16 of the public meeting agenda, it should be noted that the first item pertaining to the petition for a declaratory order of Skytop Lodge, Inc. has been postponed until public meeting of March the 20th. We recommend the adoption of the staff recommendation in the proceeding involving Amerimex Communications Corporation's petition for eligible telecommunications carrier.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
It is recommended that the Commission adopt the staff recommendation in the proceeding involving the final policy statement regarding electric distribution company storm response measures, noting the statement of Commissioner Whitmer.
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her statement. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like my statement entered into the record as if I'd read it in its entirety. Before the Commission is the final order approving revisions to our proposed policy statement regarding utility service, outage response, recovery, and public notification guidelines. We have learned many hard lessons from weather events, and we will continue to learn. Ensuring safe and reliable service is a basic responsibility of the Commission, and whether the cause of an outage is an anticipated major storm or an unexpected cybersecurity incident, today's action represents further progress on the part of the Commission, utilities, statutory advocates, and interested partners in assuring that significant measures are in place to expedite the restoration of electric service for all customers. Specifically, I have had a keen interest in the interdependency between all utility sectors from both a physical and a cybersecurity perspective, and in the development of interoperability best practices so that certain utility services can be maintained during a major service outage. Thus, I fully support the establishment of the Critical Infrastructure Interdependency Working Group and its mission to further develop additional best practices to address the needs of all customers during major outages. During these outage events, it is critical that our utilities work cooperatively across various utility and government sectors so that power is restored as quickly and safely as possible. The safe and reliable operation of one of our several utilities may be dependent upon the quick restoration of service by another sector. Having all of our utilities and non-jurisdictional partners in one room discussing best practices can only lead to greater cooperation and procedures that benefit all residential and business customers in the Commonwealth. I am confident that the outcomes from this working group will enhance our outage response capabilities during future major service outage events and will help companies share lessons learned throughout the Commonwealth for the good of all customers. I look forward to attending the first meeting of the Critical Infrastructure Interdependency Working Group to effectuate these goals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitmer. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Turning now to matters presented on behalf of the Office of Administrative Law Judge, it should be noted that with regard to items appearing on page 17, the first item in the complaint proceeding involving Shaymar McBride versus UGI Utilities, Inc., Gas Division, has been postponed until public meeting of March the 20th. The second item pertaining to the complaint proceeding involving Joseph Orak versus PPL Electric Utilities Corporation has been postponed until public meeting of April the 3rd. With that having been said, that concludes the presentation of regular agenda items. Turning now to the carry-in agenda. With regard to the first carry-in agenda item, that being the petitions for reconsideration and clarification in the proceeding involving PECO Energy Company's shopping plan so as to permit Customer Assistance Program, or CAP customers, the ability to shop for electric generation supply. Mr. Chairman, there is your joint motion with Commissioner Whitmer, your joint statement with Commissioner Whitmer, as well as the statement of Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Before the commission this morning for disposition are several petitions and answers related to PECO's Customer Assistance Program Retail Electricity Shopping Plan. At issue in these pleadings is the requirement that PECO compile and submit semi-annual reports on certain data points. To help facilitate the filing of these reports, the Commission directed PECO to consult with the Commission's Office of Competitive Market Oversight and Bureau of Consumer Services regarding the report's content, format, and timing. Upon consideration of the issues raised in the above-mentioned pleading by the parties, we will accept the suggestion of Direct to convene a collaborative amongst the interested parties. We do not, however, want the inclusion of additional interested parties to unduly delay the implementation of the reporting requirements. We therefore direct OCMO to convene a collaborative of interested parties and to prepare recommendations to the Commission within a 60-day period of the entry of the opinion and order here this morning. Also at issue is PECO's request to extend the commencement of its CAP shopping program from April 15, 2014 to June 15, 2014. PECO requests this delay to allow time to design educational materials for its CAP customers, as well as to implement information technology changes to allow CAP customers to participate in the standard offer program. The history of this case shows that PECO first became aware of the Commission's directive to allow CAP customers to participate in retail electricity choice back on October 12th, 2012. By the way, that's over 2 years ago, when the Commission disposed of its second default service filing. Further, the Commission already granted PECO 2 requested extensions, delaying the implementation of the program from January 1st, 2014 to April 1st, 2014, and from April 1st, 2014 to April 15th, 2014. Thus, PECO will now have had over 18 months' notice that it was going to be required to educate its CAP customers on shopping. Therefore, we will allow PECO to delay offering its standard offer program until July 15, 2014, to allow it to implement needed IT changes. We will not grant PECO's request to further delay commencement of the entirety of its CAP shopping customer, and therefore we move here this morning that the Office of Special Assistance prepare an order, opinion in order consistent with this motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, point of clarification, the delay is until June 15th?
Noted June 15th. Also here this morning is the joint statement of myself and Commissioner Whitmer. And let me just say, I'm taking a page out of Commissioner Cawley's playbook. It's not 15 pages, but it is lengthy, and I'll try to be brief here this morning to my colleagues. But I want to take this opportunity to note that there were, before the Commission today for disposition, are several petitions and answers related to PECO's Customer Assistance Program, Customer Assistance Retail Electricity Shopping Plan. First and foremost, we must say that from a policy perspective, while we appreciate the desire of the various petitioners to protect both CAP customers and PECO's customers that pay for universal service programs, we strongly disagree with the notion that the Commission should place limits on the products to which competitive suppliers can offer to PECO's CAP customers. We very much share the goal of controlling universal service costs, but we disagree that the proposals set forth here this morning by the various petitioners are the proper way to achieve these goals. Further, we have consistently chided those that believe that being low income equates to being unable to make a reasoned, rational choice when purchasing anything from a loaf of bread to a kilowatt hour of electricity. Rather, it has been our experience that low-income customers are among the savviest shoppers because they have to out of necessity. A requirement that the competitive generation offers must always be less than PECO's price to compare would absolutely be a barrier to entry for any generation supplier attempting to serve this class of customers. Our reasoning for this belief is quite simple. Electric generation suppliers must be able to accurately price their products to be able to cover their cost of generation supply as well as other additional costs incurred in offering service to these customers. Electric distribution companies, on the other hand, like PECO, have no such need. Instead, PECO, and often it does, incorrectly projects their costs by millions of dollars and still recover those costs from default service ratepayers at a later date. Therefore, the fluctuations in PECO's PTC often bear no rational relationship to changes in wholesale power electricity market prices, but rather are frequently driven by its ability to reconcile past miscalculations in estimated costs. As I mentioned in my hearing, I would love to bounce a lot of checks and get reconciled for bouncing those checks. This is the analogy we use with the archaic way of the way utilities get to recapture costs for miscalculating millions of dollars in default service purchases. No competitive supplier in this market could guarantee that it could always offer generation service at rates lower than the PTC because there is no way to predict what a further PTC will be, even if an electric generation supplier had a foolproof way to accurately project its wholesale energy cost. And because EGS shareholders bear any losses, unlike EDCs, whose default service customers bear any losses, it would be likely that to be an imprudent business move to elect to serve PECO CAP customers. In other words, we strongly doubt that any EGS would choose to serve PECO's CAP customers if the Commission imposed these conditions requested by the various petitioners, thereby continuing to deprive these customers their right to choose an electric generation supplier. Lastly, on the policy aspects of this decision, we believe it's imprudent to judge whether a customer is receiving a benefit from being on an EGS offer simply by comparing the EGS price to the EDC's PTC on a quarterly basis. Certainly, there are some months that the EGS customer may be paying rates higher than their local EDC's PTC, but the reverse scenario is also true. In some months, customers may be paying rates lower than the local electric distribution company's price to compare. As such, a determination regarding whether a customer made or lost money cannot be made until their contract has reached its conclusion, and the entirety of the price paid to the EGS is compared, to the entirety of the price that would have been paid to the electric distribution company. In fact, because such analysis would be largely driven by the price paid during periods of peak usage, it's entirely possible for a customer to supposedly be underwater on a 12-month contract during 3 of the 4 quarters of those 12 months and still be in the money if their EGS price beat the PTC during June, July, and August, since Pennsylvania is generally a summer peaking state. Simply put, it is overly simplistic and entirely disingenuous to suggest here this morning that capped customers can only save money by shopping if the EGS provided price is always below the PTC. We know that some will argue that this is not an appropriate time to allow capped customers to shop without requested protections because of the large price increases some customers on variable EGS rates have experienced in the recent polar vortex pricing. We believe the opposite is true, however. Because the PTC is essentially a 3-month variable rate product, we believe it is more important than ever that we allow these customers to enter into the marketplace and choose a product that offers stable and budget-friendly pricing for 6, 12, 18 months or more rather than being trapped on a roller coaster default service rate. Regardless of the policy reasons for not imposing a ceiling on the EGS cap offers, it is abundantly clear that the Commission lacks the legal authority. Let me reiterate that it is abundantly clear in the Public Utility Code that the Commission lacks legal authority to impose any conditions on EGS offers to customers, whether enrolled in CAP or otherwise. Before the Commission, the specific arguments raised by the various petitioners, we feel it is necessary to point out here this morning the mandate found in Section 2806A of the Public Utility Code. Simply put, the generation of electricity shall no longer be regulated as a public utility service or function, except as provided in this chapter. As of January 1st, 2001, consistent with the Commission's discretion under this section, all customers of electric distribution companies in this Commonwealth shall have the opportunity to purchase electricity from their choice of electric generation suppliers. The ultimate choice of electric generation supply is to rest with the consumer. This is a clear mandate from the General Assembly, as any government agency could hope to receive. There is no equivocation that all Pennsylvania electric consumers have the ability to choose their electric generation supplier, and the Commission does not have any authority over the generation of electricity, which necessarily includes the specific prices charged to end-user consumers. Given the clear and unambiguous nature of this language and pursuant to the rules of statutory construction, any legal arguments that the Commission has the authority to regulate specific EGS prices must begin and end with specific language in the Public Utility Code granting the Commission that authority. With that foundation, we turn to the discrete arguments raised by the various petitioners. The various petitioners attempted to draw a connection between the requirement found in Section 1301 of the Code that utility rates, including those charged pursuant to universal service riders, be just and reasonable, and their belief that the Commission should impose a ceiling on rates EGS is providing to CAP customers can charge. They argue that by allowing CAP customers to potentially pay rates that exceeded the default rate offered by PECO in any given quarter, all other residential customers would be required to pay higher universal service rates, and therefore the Commission cannot guarantee that those higher rates will be just and reasonable. This argument must fail for several reasons. First and foremost, the Commission's authority under Section 1301 is clearly limited to utility rates. Therefore, to the extent that the Commission needs to exercise its authority under Section 1301 due to any higher rates that non-cap residential customers may or may not be subject to as a result of the Commission's decision here this morning, and that the authority is clearly limited to examining the rates charged by PECO. To follow this point one step further, bring it to a logical conclusion, if a party could insert at some point in the future that PECO's universal service charges had become unjust and unreasonable due to the Commission's enforcement of the Public Utility Code requirements, that all customers would have the opportunity to choose their generation supplier, that party would be limited to forcing PECO to reevaluate the design of its universal service program to bring it more in line with every other energy utility here in the Commonwealth. The second point that needs to be mentioned here this morning in bringing up this argument is the petitioners conveniently neglected to point out that the rate PECO cap customers currently pay changes every 3 months without any limit imposed on the amount of those changes. As such, that non-cap customers in their rates already vary from the universal service charge reconciliation period to reconciliation period due to the rise and fall of the PTC without any protections the petitioners now seek related to PECO's cap shopping plan. Further, if the Commission has the ability under Section 1301 to limit EGS rates in order to protect customers from high universal service rates, we must also have the same authority for default service rates. We would therefore expect these same petitioners, including PECO, to petition the Commission in the near future to put a hard cap on the price PECO can charge for default service so as to ensure that universal service rates do not become unjust and unreasonable as a result of PTC increases. This is, of course, also and must mean the Exelon Board of Directors should pay particular attention to this part, that PECO believes that the Commission has the authority to prohibit it from reconciling past under-recovered costs into future default service rates if that reconciliation and resulting PTC increase would lead to higher universal service costs for customers. We are, of course, being facetious to point out the fallacy in that argument here this morning. The various petitioners also attempt to draw a parallel with PECO essentially accusing the Commission of hypocrisy between the Commission's requirement that PECO allow cap customers to enroll in its standard offer program, for which the Commission sets specific terms and conditions, and its supposed authority to set terms and conditions for suppliers serving cap customers. In a nutshell, the petitioners argued that if the Commission believes it has the authority to set terms and conditions for the standard offer program, it must also believe it has the authority to set terms and conditions for suppliers serving PECO's cap customers. In so arguing, the petitioners ignore the fact that the standard offer program is one of many generation supply options available to PECO customers. This is quite different from imposing conditions on every offer made to members of the specific subset of PECO customers that desire to exercise their legally guaranteed right to select an electric generation supplier. A more apt comparison here this morning would be if the Commission had attempted to say, as a prerequisite for serving PECO's residential customers, electric generation suppliers are required to participate in the standard offer program and otherwise offer a specific rate. Clearly, such a requirement would violate the Public Utility Code, just as imposition of these conditions suggested here by the petitioners would also violate the Public Utility Code. Further, if the Commission has the ability to impose specific terms and conditions for suppliers electing to serve cap customers, then it must have the ability to impose specific terms and conditions for other discrete customer groups. Following this logic, the Commission would be able to completely circumvent Section 2806(6)'s provision on regulating generation service by simply dividing an EDC customer base into specific groups and then imposing conditions on supplier offers tailored to meet the supposed needs of those specific customer groups. Clearly, the legislature did not intend such a result. Lastly, PICO attempts to argue that the General Assembly's inserted language of least cost default service in the Public Utility Code somehow confirms upon the Commission ample jurisdiction to control cap cost and therefore regulate the prices EGSs charge to cap customers. Quite frankly, this argument is so unreasoned and inconsistent with the Public Utility Code and any other jurisprudence flowing therefrom that we simply do not have to rebut it. Suffice it to say, the code's requirement that the EDC default service plans be designed to ensure the least cost to customers over time solely addresses the makeup of the proposed default service plans filed by the EDCs and has absolutely nothing to do with any prices, terms, or conditions of EGS product offerings. In conclusion, we will note from First Energy Solutions' answers in this matter, which quite frankly succinctly summarize the problems associated with the positions put forth by the various petitioners, and I'll read it here this morning. It says, instead of identifying language from the Electric Competition Act conferring jurisdiction over EGS prices, the various petitioners cobble together various sections of the Public Utility Code regarding the Commission's regulations of public utilities and rely on the design of PICO's standard offer program to argue that the Commission has jurisdiction over EGS prices. For all these reasons here this morning, we reject the arguments set forth by the Commission and either has a mandate or the ability to impose conditions on electric generation supply products marketed to PICO cap customers. Now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Brown for purposes of her statement. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I stated at the January 9, 2014 public meeting, I too am supportive of availing cap customers the opportunity to enroll with an electric generation supplier. In conjunction with this platform is my belief that affordability is a paramount concern for cap customers. I continue to believe that the proposal by PICO to place a ceiling on EGS offers to cap customers appropriately provides measures to maintain, at a minimum, the current level of affordability experienced by cap customers. As you note in the Electric Competition Act, this act provides that at a minimum, it should continue the protections, policies, and services that now assist customers who are low income to afford electricity. This protection appears to be even more prudent at the time given the most recent price increases realized by some customers enrolled in variable rate products with EGSs. So I continue to believe that the price ceiling proposed by PICO justly maintains affordability for cap participants. Further, I submit that the price ceiling originally proposed by PICO and supported by OCA represents a prudent policy to assure that PICO's cap program costs do not significantly increase. I know I have voted to support the motion, but I just want the record to accurately reflect that I dissent in part on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any further discussion? Okay. Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passed, I believe, unanimously. And we have the joint statement entered into the record by myself and Commissioner Whitmer. And we have the statement entered into the record from Commissioner Brown. Was that a partial dissent? Noting partial dissent of Commissioner Brown.
Continuing with the presentation of agenda items, the carry-in agenda, on behalf of the Office of Special Assistance, on page 2 of the carry-in agenda, it is recommended that the Commission adopt the recommendation with regard to further modifications to PPL Electric Utilities Corporation's Act 129 Phase 2 Energy Efficiency and Conservation Plan, noting the statements of Commissioners Whitmer and Commissioner Cawley.
So moved. Second. I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her statement. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like my statement entered into the record as if I'd read it in its entirety. Before the Commission today is the PPL petition seeking approval for changes to its Act 129 Phase 2 EE&C plan. I am supportive of staff's recommendation to approve some of the minor and non-minor modifications requested. I would like to highlight and congratulate PPL for including changes that shift their program's focus to measures that will provide deeper, long-lasting energy efficiency improvements. For example, PPL will establish a pilot program that comprehensively evaluates up to 3 all-electric, master-metered, low-income multifamily dwellings. In addition, the company is establishing a thermography pilot as well as providing thermal imaging guns and training for home energy audits. As I stated when this commission approved moving forward with Phase 2, whole building approaches like the ones described above represent the best long-term investment of Act 129 dollars. With that said, however, it is not lost on me that a major part of the reason PPL was able to propose these modifications was a significant underestimation of its Phase 1 carryover savings. The company's original estimated Phase 1 carryover of 110,000 megawatt-hour per year has, upon verification, increased to 551,000 megawatt-hours per year. As these carryover figures may likely be used to help to determine the compliance targets in future phases of EE and C plans, it is imperative that we have data that is as timely and accurate as possible. To that end, I ask that PPL work with the Act 129 statewide evaluator to develop methods to ensure the estimated carryover calculation methodology improves in Phase 2. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitmer. Now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Cawley for purposes of his statement. Commissioner Cawley.
Thank you, Chairman. As Commissioner Whitmer has noted, this is a petition by PPL Electric Utilities to change its Act 129 Phase 2 Energy Efficiency and Conservation Plan. In the petition, PPL sought approval for 40 modifications to its existing plan. Like my colleague, I want to commend PPL for these plan modifications. And as she described them, they provide deeper, long-lasting energy efficiency improvements. What did she mean by that, and what do I mean by that? Well, PPL's proposal focuses on emerging lighting technologies, and it also requires higher efficiency standards for the refrigerator rebate programs. It also requires utility pre-approval for customer placement of equipment orders for commercial and industrial measures in the prescriptive equipment program and the custom incentive program, rather than letting these commercial and industrial customers order equipment which they were going to do anyway. So it was not truly an incentive. So this petition intends to tighten up those requirements and is meant to address so-called free ridership, where a proposal does not act as a true incentive to customers because they were going to do something anyway. So I believe it's good policy to constantly review these plans to ensure that they embrace the latest and most cost-effective market opportunities and that focus on long-lasting savings measures and measures that eliminate so-called free ridership, as I've described. So I think that PPL and the other interested parties that participated in this proceeding deserve plaudits for their efforts. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Cawley. Let me also add to congratulate you for representing us most effectively in front of the House Consumer Affairs Committee on this issue of Act 129. I think you both hit the mark with your statements here this morning, and I'd like to also recognize the technical staff that's been part of this effort. I think Pennsylvania should be very proud of where we're heading with our Act 129 program, and again, commend you both for your statement. If I could, I'll associate myself with both statements here this morning. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, noting the statements of Commissioner Cawley and Commissioner Whitmer.
Turning now to page 3 of the carrying agenda, it is recommended that the commission adopt the staff recommendation in the proceeding involving the petitions for reconsideration and exceptions to the compliance filing involving Columbia Water Company's general rate increase proceeding.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously.
That concludes the presentation of agenda items.
And I believe we have no other items to come before the commission here this morning. With that in mind, we are adjourned.